Welcome to World Affairs Today, brought to you by the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C., a leading forum for global education and international affairs.
Thank you very much. We will only take a minute of your time. I'm Ronald Neumann, and I'm the president of the American Academy of Diplomacy, and it's my pleasure to be co-hosting and to welcome you here. The Academy has existed for over 30 years. It's composed of former senior diplomats, not all career Foreign Service members, but all representing extraordinary diplomatic service. The Academy has no government support. Its mission is entirely private to improve American diplomacy and increase public understanding of the role of diplomacy. And as I work on that project, I find it needs a lot of work. Tom Pickering, former Undersecretary and Ambassador, is our chairman. He's here somewhere, but I can't see anything except light. Oh, he's over here. Tom, thank you for being here. The Sisco Forum is named in honor of former Undersecretary and previous chairman, I might say, of the board of the Academy, Joseph Sisco. This forum was made possible by his daughter, Carol Sisco, the Sisco Family Fund, and members of the Academy who wanted to create a living memorial to one of America's finest diplomats. And Carol will say a bit more later. The Academy and the World Affairs Council of D.C. have co-sponsored a previous Sisco Forum event and a number of other programs over the years. Our missions are complementary, which is a good thing since we've been sharing a suite for about 20 years. I want to thank Amy Stoltz of my staff and Stephanie Fessler, Mark Sams, Gabby Lavareda of the WAC, along with Hong Din and the interns for all their critical support for both organizations for this event. And I want to thank the Army-Navy Club for its flexibility and support. I'm going to pass to Heidi for a minute, but please do keep eating.
Thank you, Ron. On behalf of the Board of Directors and Global Advisory Council of the World Affairs Council, I thank you all for being here today and for your support for the annual Joseph Sisco Memorial Forum. The World Affairs Council's global education and international affairs programs facilitate worldwide knowledge transfer and analytical insight for American and international educators and their students. The Council also informs the American public about global issues of importance of strengthening U.S. diplomacy. Both the World Affairs Council and the American Academy organizations are vital when it comes to preparing the next generation of men and women to confront the global issues of increasing importance to the United States. The Council is especially pleased to be able to join forces in our efforts to support this important annual Joseph Sisco Memorial Forum. Our board joins Ambassador Neumann in thanking Carol Sisco and the Sisco Family Fund and the Raytheon Corporation as the lead sponsors of today's program. Thanks also to our other WAC DC and Academy table sponsors and to all of our attendees for your support of today's program and respective global education and public awareness programs. As Ambassador Neumann indicated, this annual Sisco Forum Luncheon was established to stimulate public discussion on relevant themes of U.S. foreign policy. Our distinguished speakers today, former Secretary of State Colin Powell and Ambassador Marc Grossman, have both made profound impact on American diplomatic affairs, and we are honored to have them with us today. I am pleased also to let you know that in just a few minutes we'll be joined by a group of midshipmen from the United States Naval Academy and their instructor, Dr. Lori Murray. They will be our guests for the program part of today's event, and we are pleased that they are able to participate.
Good afternoon, and I have two imperatives here. Actually three, because the voice of God will come down and get me if I don't get through the speech before Ambassador Grossman comes. So that's one imperative. The other is you all need to continue eating so that you can get through your meal, and it will not insult me at all because my father, for those of you who knew him, Joseph Sisco, he would always say in his Italian way, food is love. So I will assume that you all love me, and so please keep eating. The other imperative is please don't applaud, because I only have a few minutes and I would like to hear General Powell as much as all of you. I would like to thank today the various sponsors who are helping provide this event, and in particular Raytheon and their underwriting, the partners, Black & Veatch Corporation, Edie Frazier, Delavan Foundation, Strzok and Levin, Frank and Marcia Carlucci, and Una Chapman Cox Foundation. Also would like to recognize the tables of State Farm Insurance and Robertson Foundation. But this couldn't happen without the American Academy of Diplomacy or the World Affairs Council and all of the people who work with them, and you've done a wonderful job, and I thank you very much. I just wanted to talk briefly about the Sisco Forum. A lot of people of you have asked about it and what it is and how it started. Our first event was in 2005. My sister Jane and I decided that we would like to start our father, Joe, and death, we decided to this forum, which would be a living memorial. Sorry, there's a stool back here that is for midgets, and I'm having probably stepping on the on the line, so I'll be going in and out. The forum, in fact, is a product of this, but I don't usually speak at these events. I don't ask to speak. I was kind of struck today that I really did want to speak, and I think it had a lot to do with Colin Powell. My father was a colleague of General Powell's. They worked together on various projects. He respected the man greatly, and he liked him. And I think in knowing my father that some of you, as some of you do, that those things are hard to win over. He was a wonderfully friendly man. He was a family man, but he was someone who you kind of earned your respect with, and certainly he admired Colin Powell, and I thank Colin Powell, General Powell, for being here. It's a great honor to our family. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is, I'm a psychotherapist by profession, so I generally ask myself, why am I doing what I'm doing? It's terribly boring. So I, as with other things, tried to figure out why I wanted to talk at this forum. And of course, what does a psychotherapist do when they're asking these sorts of questions? I went online. So what I did was I put in the name side by side of Joseph Sisco and Colin Powell. And what I found was something I'd never seen, which was a comment by General Powell after my father's death, saying that Dad was a dear friend, a respected colleague, and a champion of peace. And I've got to say, thank you again for that. And I was very glad to see your respect of him. There are several things that I think also drove this kind of interest in talking a few minutes. And primarily what I was thinking about is in reading about General Powell and Mrs. Powell, is that there are a lot of similarities between the Powells and my family. And what came to light really was in thinking about some of the things that they shared, which I think really had a lot to do with how they viewed the world, how they viewed diplomacy, their service to this country. The features that I really found most distinctive were that in both of both General Powell and my father were first-generation Americans. My father came from an Italian family. My grandfather was an Italian tailor in Chicago, Illinois. And as I understand it, General Powell, his parents were Jamaicans. He lived in another city called New York City. And they grew up in somewhat similar circumstances. They also made the most important decision of their lives. And they probably don't even know exactly that, but they married steel magnolias. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, these are strong Southern women. And I would say I'm of Italian descent, and I'm also of steel magnolia descent of multiple generations. So, as I also understand it, General Powell met his wife and was married 2 weeks later. I don't know if that's true, but is that of tabloid making? I know that Joe Sisco met my mother at the University of Chicago, where they were students. He proposed to her on Valentine's Day and was married by March 26th. So I do know that as a fact. The third thing I think that is important about these unions, and I think they're so important in whether you're in a diplomatic family, a military family, any sort of public service family, is that it takes two to perpetuate careers. And, but the other thing is two strong women. And Mrs. Powell has had an amazing career. She is now the chairperson of America's Promise Alliances, has been for 20 years. And my mother was, as some of you know, one of the women who broke the glass ceiling. She was on over 20 corporate boards in the United States. And she has been an advocate in nonprofits, equally so throughout her lifetime. And I think the whole thing about this is that you have women who are willing to serve in multiple capacities, wives, mothers, people who show up at Army affairs, diplomatic affairs, have to stay until the last person above them goes out the door, plus, you know, having their own careers. And I think that has been instrumental. I can speak for my father and for our family. I know that the Powell adult children are very successful people in their own right, and I'm sure that there's some attribution and importance of that. The other thing that I think is indicative of these two men is an amazing devotion to their families. And I've got to say that my father used to always think he was at home, even though for the younger years of our lives, he was actually at the United Nations every year for 3 months. And so we, not being children of foreign service, junior foreign service officers, were not a particularly wealthy family. And we wouldn't see our dad, and my mother would, and I'm sorry to all of you in the military, but I will say she held down the fort. And this was very important, but beyond that, my father never thought he wasn't with us. And this was a phenomenon my mother always pointed out, because he always thought he was with us, and we meant a lot to him. And I have an understanding that that may very well be true for the Powell children and family as well. So these are the things I see as similarities between these men. They were both, and they are very patriotic. They've served their country. My father never won anything in his life other than being drafted into the World War II. Ended up in New Guinea, 5 combat rhythms, and stayed until the end of the war. And for those of you in state who know my father as Jumpin' Joe Sisco, He was Jumpin' Joe because he started at 30 because he was in the Army and went to graduate school on a GI grant and his winnings on a troopship poem winning pokers. So that's the man who started at 30, and I think that drove his career very seriously. There's one thing that my mother used to say, and I will stop at that, and it may be a very indelicate assessment of judging one's life. But I said my mother was a Southerner, born in Trinity, Texas. And as my family knows who are here, we had a great-grandfather called Big Daddy. And Big Daddy was a dentist who was very progressive in Trinity, Texas. He would spend his weekends opening his dental practice to the African-American people in Trinity because they did not have access to health care. And my great-grandfather used to say, Palmer Murdoch was his name, he said, there are 3 G's in lives. And he said, the first G stands for give. If you have the means, then repay the institution and community out of your own time and funds. The second G is get. Persuade others to give of their time and funds for worthwhile causes. And as to the third G, if you're not willing or capable of giving or getting, then you don't belong. So get. So with this in mind, I'm going to get and turn over the microphone to Ambassador Grossman to introduce the highlight of our afternoon. Thank you.
I just want to welcome you all here. And I want to first of all say thank you to Carol Sisco. Thank you for helping us with this event, for sponsoring this event, and thank you for those very personal words that you gave. And if you'd allow me kind of one in turn, when I joined the Foreign Service, a young officer, Ambassador Sisco was the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. And I can remember being given a job at one point to take a piece of paper up to the Undersecretary. It was urgent. And I was told to get this piece of paper to Joe Sisco. So I got up there on the 7th floor, and I ran down the corridor in front of the Secretary's office, the Deputy Secretary's office, and the Undersecretary's office. And finally, someone stepped out and grabbed me by the arm and said, "Don't ever run in this corridor again." I can tell you that 25 years later, when General Powell gave me the opportunity to be the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, I ran down that corridor all the time. I want to join in thanking the sponsors. My plan for today is to engage General Powell in a conversation. As you can imagine, there are a certain number of things that were true at the State Department. One was that General Powell truly needs no introduction. But I would say that along the list of things that you read in your program, he's also a great teacher. And for me, what he taught us was that you can do great things and still be a good human being, that the people matter, and that optimism is a force multiplier. And those are lessons that I have taken with me for the rest of my life. I also want to say that I had the good fortune to watch a program. General Powell went back to Foreign Service Institute the other day, and Nancy McEldowney, the director of the Foreign Service Institute, is here along with some of her students. And I was struck by the reception that General Powell was given at that event by people who recognized what he had done for the State Department and for the Foreign Service and for the Civil Service. And I know we have here the winners, 2 winners from an A100 class leadership award. We thank you very much for being here. And that leadership imbibed came from General Powell, and so I appreciate that very much. We'll get to today's events, I'm sure. We'll take cards from the audience. But we thought we might just step back for a minute and think a little bit about the larger questions of America as an indispensable power and what life will be like going forward and not necessarily looking back. But first, I have to ask this question. I couldn't resist, which is, after your 4 years at the State Department, and I got so used to calling you Secretary Powell, when you went back to private life, General Powell again, I have to ask why.
The reason is very simple. It's a protocol. You are a secretary for the time you're in office, and when you leave, you become a former secretary. You never become a former general. Also, it's what most people remembered me as from my military career, and I was an Army officer for 35 years before I had the privilege of being the Secretary of State. But it was interesting. On my first day at the Department of State, somebody came in late in the afternoon and said to me, General, or Mr. Secretary, here's a question, what do we call you? Is it General or Mr. Secretary? I said, as long as I'm here, it's Mr. Secretary, and you are my troops, and that's how we will operate for the next 4 years, or however long it is. Got it? Yes, sir. There was a lot of concern in the department when I came in, and then Rich Armitage came in with me as Deputy Secretary, and Grant Green came in, and Vinnie Kelly, my legislative affairs guy, was a Marine, and it looked like the Pentagon had finally succeeded in its ultimate wish to take over the State Department. But I think we demonstrated to the department that we were here to do the best we could for the department, and that we weren't taking over, we were here to be partners.
Good. Thank you very much. One of the things that I was always struck in our conversations and in your writing and other things that you have said is the importance that you gave to diplomacy, but diplomacy backed by force. Now, the diplomacy without force is just sort of walking around.
They are linked. It's all part of, as some of my colleagues like to say, the tool bag that's available. And so I've always felt strongly that you should try to solve conflicts in this world through negotiations, through diplomacy. Anytime we can solve a problem that way and not use force and satisfy our objectives, let's push for that. But force always has to be available. It has to be in the corner. I don't think we need to advertise it. Everybody knows we have it. Everybody knows what we can do. And it's also been my experience in my career that when diplomacy has not worked, and when it was necessary to use military force to achieve a political purpose, that we did it, and we did it in a decisive manner. And make sure that we understood what we were getting into, we understood the political objective that we were trying to achieve, and we tried to bring the conflict to a resolution as quickly as we possibly could, using decisive force, and then get back to peacemaking, get back to diplomacy.
And do you think that those linkages are well made today, that that's something that, I mean, you're in front of a group here, of course, that is interested in foreign affairs, that studies these things. But as you go out to the rest of the country, is that linkage something that's well understood, you think?
I think the American people understand it instinctively because it's commonsensical. It's not always applied throughout all of the history of the United States. In my experience, I had a couple of operations that clearly were, met that standard. When we invaded Panama in December of 1989, there was a particular reason to do it, and the original plan was just to remove Noriega. Those of you who remember my good friend, General Noriega. But when the instant came to do it, my recommendation to President Bush, and with Secretary Cheney's support, was not just remove Noriega, remove the entire Panamanian Defense Force and start fresh. And we had a president in hiding in Panama. And so we went in with a force of 28,000, which is far more than you needed to take out Noriega, but it did the trick. And we have now seen multiple peaceful democratic elections take place in Panama over the last 20-odd years, and there isn't a single American soldier serving in Panama any longer. Same thing with Desert Storm. We were criticized at one point for, why didn't you go to Baghdad? Well, that was never the mission. The mission assigned by the president, supported by the Congress, endorsed by the United Nations, and supported by almost every country in the world but a couple, was to kick the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. Clear mission, defined precisely, and President Bush gave us all the force that we thought was necessary to accomplish that mission. And it was an operation where we were all set to go. I was able to say to the president, I'm guaranteeing the outcome. We saw that the Iraqi army was essentially trapped in the desert, not moving. We knew how to go around them, and we were going to make sure that we had a decisive amount of force, and that worked. You don't always get that set up. Things can become much more difficult as they are now, as we deal with the situation in Afghanistan, Iraq, and now the new element of ISIL coming into Iraq, and also having a very strong presence in Syria as well, and creating problems throughout the region. It's a little harder to single out a political objective that the achievement of which will solve all the problems. And it's a little difficult to figure out how to apply force in a way that is supported by the American people, that has the support of our Congress, the support of the international community. And I think we're still trying to find our way through that right now. The President has decided that air power is the weapon of choice for the moment, and he's put together a coalition to do that. But I'm an infantry officer, and I know that sooner or later, if you want to prevail and apply decisive force, you've got to go in on the ground. The ground has to be taken. The enemy has to know you have lost. And that force is going to have to be the Iraqi army. And it's going to have to be an Iraqi army that has the will to fight, and that has a government that has given them the will to fight, given them the means to fight, and has also done the diplomacy to try to bring together the different elements of Iraqi society behind this effort to prevail. An army can be well equipped, it can be well trained, but if it doesn't have the will to fight because it doesn't believe in the government that has sent it to the war, you have a problem. That's the principal thing that has to be fixed right now. Restore the capability of the Iraqi army, but make sure that they have the will to fight, and that will has to derive from the political leadership of the authorities in Baghdad.
Thank you. I'm interested also in another application of force in the contemporary world. You laid out your criteria, thinking about how to use the Army, use military force. How do you feel about the decision to send 3,000 troops and perhaps more now to deal with Ebola?
During my time as Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and in other military assignments as Commander of Army Forces in the United States, we found issues like that would pop up frequently. A riot in Los Angeles, and suddenly the Army is called upon with the Marines to go do something about it. Hurricanes in Florida that wiped out huge sections of South Florida, and the military is called upon to deal with that. So it is not out of the usual run of things the military has to do. This one's a little different because it is in a faraway place, and it is a disease that we really don't quite have a handle on yet. But what is wonderful about our military forces is that they are so adaptable. They are so successful in organizing logistics. Nobody can move like we can move logistically and move forces around. So I don't think this is an unreasonable mission to give the armed forces of the United States, as long as they are working with health organizations from around the world, and especially from the United Nations. And we have to make sure that as we send these young people over there, we're protecting them from the very disease they're going over to help other people stay away from and to be removed from future harm and be put in isolation. And that's going to take time, and it's going to take a long while before this disease hopefully runs its course. But yes, it's the kind of mission that comes along. It has nothing to do with using force per se. It has nothing to do with a political objective. It's a humanitarian objective. It's the same thing we started to do in Somalia in the last month of the Bush 41 administration. We stopped the starving and the lack of supplies for the people, but then we stayed too long, got caught up in another one of these, let's make this place a nice democracy, and the mission did not turn out the way we thought it would, and hopefully now Somalia is in a better place, but that's 20 years later.
This morning when you and I were communicating a little bit, we both noticed, and I'm sure all the audience did, there was a very interesting kind of special section in the New York Times today about energy. And one of the things that I know in your private life, and interests me as well, is the United States, after having a revolution in energy, is in a completely different place than it was 10 years ago, even 15 years ago. And that the United States, as this piece of paper talked about, was about to become an energy power in this world again. And I wonder from your perspective, if you think about your time as National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, the people who hold those jobs now, when they go in to see the President of the United States and they say, Mr. President, you've got options that your immediate predecessors didn't have, how do you think it'll affect our foreign policy?
I think it will affect our foreign policy very significantly. I mean, we are now going to become a major exporter of fossil-based energy. And there are a lot of discussions taking place as to whether we should remove the restrictions on exporting crude oil out of the country. These are restrictions that were put in place, by the way, initially back in 1973 when we were going through the Arab oil crisis. and it's not really relevant. That needs to be restudied, and I don't see why we shouldn't be exporting a commodity for which there is a demand, and a demand that we can supply. A lot of debate about the XL pipeline, phase 4 of that whole project. All of that will be worked out because it's important for us with our southern and northern neighbors, Canada and Mexico, to be seen as an energy exporter to the rest of the world. But we have to be very, very careful that we don't think it's a weapon of some kind that we're going to use against some of our Middle Eastern friends. They will still be exporting. And oil is a fungible thing. It goes all around the world in different ways, and we have to see it that way. And the last thing I want to do is to see that we're using energy in a way that is not in the interest of the friends who have been with us for all these years, providing us oil. But the whole thing's going to change. But I also think, based on other activities I'm involved in, is that while we are enhancing our ability to use natural gas and oil in its many new dimensions, let's continue working on clean energy. Let's continue to work on solar. Let's continue to work on wind. I'm in a company called Bloom Energy, and we are developing solid oxide fuel cells. One could fit on this platform right now, and you put natural gas in one end, and electricity comes out the other end, and there's absolutely no emissions coming out, very little noise coming out, very clean energy. So we need to find ways to have clean energy. I'm also a great believer that nuclear power has a role to play in solving the energy problem. And when you're thinking about energy, then you also have to think about all of these options, and you also have to think about what is it doing to the environment. You don't talk about energy without thinking about what it's doing to the environment. And this is especially a case in China and a real problem for China. They need energy, and they have to have it. So they're building coal-fired plants, oil-fired plants, nuclear, wind. They're using everything in order to satisfy their energy needs. The one thing in this energy transformation which is going to change our economy, it's going to change our relations with other countries, but the one thing you don't hear much about is the demand for energy is also increasing at a rapid rate. China has 800 million people who have not yet benefited from the economic miracle that has been China for the last 40 years, and they want to know when's our turn. And their turn will come when the Chinese find new industries to put them in and to get them off the farms. They don't need that many farmers. And as China develops new factories and continues to go through an industrial revolution, guess what they need to do that? Energy. And so we have to make sure while we're looking at the new sources we have and the new opportunities we have, where the demand is and how can we satisfy the demand in the cleanest possible way.
Give me a nice and easy segue to my next topic, which was that.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Which was that certainly my early memories of the time you were Secretary of State dominated by China and the P3 incident, as you will recall even better than I will. I was interested in kind of where you thought this pivot or rebalance to Asia was going on. I mean, here we are, the world is filled every day, what's going on in Iceland, what's going on in the Middle East, and all that's really important. But as you say, there's China out there. And I wondered, rebalance, pivot, and also very importantly is your experience tells you kind of how the United States is seen credibly by our treaty allies in Asia. Very important as well.
I hate the term rebalance. I hate the term pivot. I hate the term reset. I have always objected to these one-word cliches that are supposed to capture a very sophisticated relationship between a couple of nations. And my own experience with China goes back 42 years now, when I was a young lieutenant colonel, a White House fellow, and I was allowed to travel in China for 3 weeks. One of the first American military officers allowed in China since the 1949 revolution. And it was right after the Cultural Revolution in China that I was there and saw these people and saw how desperate they were to get ahead, to join the world that was moving forward. And I watched for the last 40 years as China has come up and become the second largest economy in the world, but still with a totalitarian form of government. They haven't changed, and they're not going to change that. But what I tried to do as National Security Advisor, as Chairman, and as Secretary of State is to deal with the Chinese in a respectful manner as a country that is emerging, a country that is demanding more of a say in Asia, and that is not unreasonable, a country that is investing in its military as we invest in our military, and a country that is holding $1.5 trillion worth of our paper. As I say, it's a great deal for everybody. China makes products. They send the products to Walmart. Walmart sells all that stuff and sends the profit back to China, and then China lends us the money that they just got from Walmart. These guys are good. I mean, that is really good. But that's the nature of the international economic system that we are in. And so when you say you're going to pivot, it means you're turning towards something, but it also means you're turning away from something. And so when we pivoted to Asia, the Chinese immediately saw it as, hey, they're pivoting toward us. They're coming after us. And all of our other friends, particularly in Europe and in the Middle East, said, uh-oh, America doesn't care as much about us as they used to. And so those kinds of terms don't seem to be very, very useful. But I think what we need with China is a mature relationship. We have to speak to them candidly about human rights. We have to speak to them candidly about hacking and other problems that we have with them. But at the same time, they need us and we need them in a good economic relationship that is also a good political relationship, even if we disagree with a lot of their policies. One of the things we have to learn in this new world, this post-Cold War world, is that not everybody is ready to follow our lead just because we ask them to, or we want them to, like we might have been able to do during the Cold War. We have to realize that the most important thing we can do for our foreign policy interest now is to fix things that are wrong here in the United States of America, to work hard in our infrastructure, to work hard in our education, to do something about a Congress that is totally constipated, if I can use a rather odd term. It's getting nothing done. And people are watching. People are saying, that's the model, eh? Is that what Jeffersonian democracy is about they keep telling us about? What are we going to do about the fact that we have more people in jail than any other nation on the face of the earth, totally and by capita? What are we going to do about Guantanamo, which I've been pushing to close for the last 12 years, in office and out? Not that these folks are good, but it turns out that the federal courts are throwing more terrorists in jail every day than we ever got thrown in jail from Guantanamo. And it is a weight around us as we try to make a moral cause about our country to the rest of the world. So we really have to focus on our economy, our education, our infrastructure, and our economic base. You know, we are coming out of a bad situation that began in 2008 economically, but at the same time, not all of our fellow citizens are sharing in the recovery, and that has to be a priority. Everybody in this room is doing well, but I can take you one block from here and show you people who are not doing as well and don't have the same confidence in the economy as we do. We also have to make sure that we have a healthcare system that benefits everybody. I'm not supporting any particular healthcare system. I don't know enough about it. All I know is that I've had nice socialized medicine from the United States Army for the last 56 years. Works fine. I'm not suggesting everybody get military health care, but I'm saying to you, with all the money we spend on health care and the needs of our citizens, we should have universal health care for everybody. And I would wish that our Congress in due course would start to make whatever fixes they want into the Affordable Health Care Act, but realize that we have people desperately in need of proper health care and make sure that all of our citizens, every one, to include 6 million children who are uninsured, get that kind of health care. And so, not drifting too far off the subject of the question, I feel that there's a lot that we can do with respect to reassuring our treaty allies. There's a lot we can do with respect to fixing our own economy so that once again we can be, a light that shines before the rest of the world to illuminate the world. I don't use terms like we are indispensable or we're number one. It means that somebody isn't indispensable, is lesser. So I think we have to sometimes speak with a little more humility. People know who we are. They know our strength. They know our economic strength. They know our political strength. And they know our military strength. So I think we don't have to advertise it as strongly as we sometimes do. Let your light so shine before you, if I can slip slightly into biblical references.
Let me follow up with that, because one of these I've been most interested in. You've been kind enough to send me from time to time information on the Powell School at City College of New York. And it speaks exactly to these questions: education, diversity. Who's the next round of leaders in the United States? And I think people would benefit from hearing a little bit about the school.
Well, I can tell you by the year 2040 or so, the next set of leaders in the nation are going to be brownish. In another 30 years, the majority of Americans will be those we call minorities now. It will be Hispanics, Asian Americans, and African Americans. And so my life, the passion in my life now with the America's Promise Alliance that was made reference to earlier, and what I'm doing in different schools around the country, but especially in my school in Harlem. I graduated from the City College of New York, which is in Harlem. It's about a mile from where I was born. And it's been amusing over the years to have people come up to me and say, well, General Powell, you're chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. When did you graduate from West Point? Couldn't have gotten in. Not like those wonderful middies up there who got into academies. Good to see you guys. And I said, couldn't have gotten in. It was impossible. It was above my possibility to aspire to get into West Point. Just a little kid in the corner in South Bronx. And well, did you go to the Citadel or VMI? I said, no, when I was entering college, they wouldn't allow black folks to go to those schools. So I went to City College of New York, and I got a quality education, discovered ROTC at City College, and that became my career path, going into the military, because my academic record didn't suggest I was going anywhere else. And in fact, I almost didn't get out. I was hanging around a long time, and they got worried about me, and they finally decided to take my A's, straight A's in ROTC, roll it into my grade point average, bring me up to 2.0, and get me out of here. And they did it with great fanfare. Get him into the Army, we'll never see him again. But now I'm back, and when I left the State Department, when I stepped down from the State Department a few weeks later, I knew there was a small center at CCNY that had been named after me. And I went up there to see what was going on. And I sat in the president's conference room, and they brought in about 12 students who were in my center. And they were all minority. Most were immigrants. Most were from somewhere else. And they started telling me their stories. And it was the American story repeated over and over and over again. And these kids came from poor families. There are no legacy students in my school because none of their parents went to college. And I don't want any legacy students coming back. We're going to go and educate the kids who are most in need. And when I heard their stories, I said, this is where I belong. I'm home again, back in Harlem, back at CCNY, and this is where I'll work. After a few years, the school decided the college decided to make an entire school of the college named after me, the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership. And our focus is on leadership training and on service, so that what they study in their academic department is what they also do in the community as they perform service. And these youngsters are going to be the leaders. And what's so fascinating about them is they're not fooling around. They come from immigrant families, they're poor, most of them are working, some of them have families, they're hungry. And they come to school, and we don't fool around up there. And so I'm very proud of that, because it gives me the chance not just to stay here in the present and talk about present issues, but allows me to participate in the future, because they are the future of our country. It also allows me to, if I can take one more second on this, Mark, I get asked all the time, well, how are we doing? Aren't we, are we in real trouble? And I say, we have lots of problems. Shimon Peres said to me right after the Cold War was over, former president of Israel, a great friend of us, everybody in this room, and we were kind of musing at the situation in the post-Soviet world. And he put his arm around me and said, Colin, oi, we've lost all our enemies, now all we have are problems. Well, we found some enemies. we had to go find them too. But what he was saying is, the world that you're looking at now is a world with lots of problems. But when you step back, America is under no existential threat to our existence the way it was during the Cold War. Our major interest should be with places like China, 1.3 billion people, India, 1.3 billion people, Latin America, several hundred million, Europe, several hundred million, and focus on the problems. Do everything we can to solve those problems, but remember that is not the whole world. And what the American people are saying as I travel around the country and doing business and giving speeches is that they understand the need for us to deal with these problems, but first and foremost, let's make sure we're fixing the United States, and that'll be the greatest thing we can contribute to our foreign policy as we try to help others in the world and solve all the problems in the world.
Thank you. I got two more questions, one from me and one thank you very much from the midshipmen who are here. Thank you all. I've got to try to combine your questions into one, if you would allow me. I acknowledge here, right in front of us, a number of serving Foreign Service officers, and of course we have a number of retired officers in the room from American Academy of Diplomacy and World Affairs Councils of America. I just wanted to take you back, if I could, to the time when you became the Secretary of State. And I remember very clearly how proud we were of the effort that you made to bring the Foreign Service, the Civil Service, and locally engaged staff, not to homogenize them, but to bring them together, to fight and to work as one team. Yeah. And when I think back on that time, it's something that I find to be a very admirable thing. I know there are people now who think that this has all been taken too far and that everybody wants to be the same. I wonder if you look back 9 years, sort of how you feel about all that.
Well, when I came into the department, I was handed a bunch of studies and reports of things that needed to be fixed, and I started to work on that. And I also even got a report that all of you will remember called SOS, Save Our State, which was a very troubling report to receive on your first day. But as I looked around the building and got to know the various followers that I had in the Department of State, I sensed that there was too great a difference between what the Foreign Service did and what the Civil Service did. And I felt that if we were going to be a team, there had to be mutual respect and trust between the two. So the first thing I did, which caused the controversy that Mark is talking about, is my staff said, well, Foreign Service Day is coming up. What's that? It's once a year we bring in all the Foreign Service officers, retired and otherwise, to come hear what's going on. I said, well, when is Civil Service Day? There is no Civil Service Day. I said, well, there's going to be a Civil Service Day, and we're going to call it Foreign Affairs Day and bring everybody in. Why shouldn't we bring everybody in? And people said, nobody will show up. Well, it turned out everybody showed up. The room was full. I think they wanted to see a cat fight. I don't know what it was, but the room was full. And then I said, what training do we give civil servants? And the answer was, no, it's all kind of OJT. So we told the Foreign Service Institute, get ready to start giving leadership training, not only to Foreign Service officers, but to civil servants. And I just wanted to create an environment where everybody trusted everybody else. Everybody was seen equally as vital to the success of the department and success of American diplomacy and foreign policy. And I used to talk to Mark and the other career folks that I had around me. Mark and a number of you are here in this room, but Mark was my undersecretary, my number 3. And I said, Mark, you know, we're only going to be here a few years, and then all of us military guys are going to leave you. If what we did makes sense, it'll be continued. And the kind of things we did with respect to training, information, revolution within the department, and this blending of the two, and not only that, but also the Foreign Service nationals and contractors. And I said, it'll only work if we have convinced you guys that this is the way to go. And one of the greatest sources of satisfaction that I and Rich Armitage and Grant Green have to this day is as we go around the world and we run into people in the Foreign Service and the Civil Service, they think that has been the case. And therefore, it's not just credit to my tenure, but credit to the Foreign Service leaders who took it on after we left and made sure that it was a value system that continued. And I'm glad to say that, at least from what we hear, it has continued.
Thank you very much. It won't surprise you that the questions from our midshipmen are all very forward-looking. And if I could kind of summarize them for you, General Powell, they are about the advance of technology. They are about how does the United States of America stay ahead of threats. It is about whether our military is fully funded, whether it's ready to take on threats. And especially interesting, a question that said, yes, we may be ready, as you said, but are we ready to take on these challenges around the globe? And so as we kind of honor not just our serving Foreign Service officers, but midshipmen, I'd leave that as your last question.
Well, let me thank the midshipmen for your willingness to serve and your commitment to the Academy, your commitment to the Navy and the Marine Corps, and your commitment to the nation. I'm really proud of you and proud of you all being here. Thank you. I've always believed that the Armed Forces of the United States needs to have balanced capability. You can't just be all special forces or all submariners. You can't just plan on a major war and not on a little war. Peacekeeping and rescue operations. So we need a balanced force. And we have to make sure that the senior leadership of the armed forces provides to the president and provides to the Congress a careful assessment of what that requires. And then the leaders of the department have to go up there and fight for it from the Congress. One of the most challenging things I ever faced as chairman was the Cold War ended. And I'm sitting there with a force of 2.1 million people, and the Russians have left the theater. And I have 100 attack submarines we're trying to reach, but there are no more Russian ships out there for them to go attack. And so how do you bring that down? And we sat around, just the 6 of us, the 4 chiefs of services, myself and my vice chairman, just by ourselves. And we made a judgment as to how far down we should bring the armed forces after the Cold War and make sure that we still have a terrific armed force. And we settled on a number, an astonishing number to think of now, but at the time we said 25%. And I leaked that to a reporter one day. It went into the newspaper, and Mr. Cheney was not happy with me that morning. Anyway, that's what we did. We took it down 25%, but we did it in a way that was sensible. And that force became a very competent force and fought the Gulf War in Panama just a few years afterwards. So you have to come up with a plan that is achievable and that satisfies this balanced perspective. And if you don't come up with a plan out of the Pentagon, then Congress will figure out how to do it. And so you have to give Congress something for your supporters to defend and make your opponents attack on your ground. They have to attack your plan. Right now, we are in idiot land. Sequestration is perhaps one of the dumbest financial, fiscal things I've ever seen come out of the United States Congress. But there it is, and it's going to really hurt the Pentagon when it kicks in again this coming year. Hopefully, Congress will see it in their wisdom to change that. And it's not just sequestration that hurts the military, it hurts the whole government. It's not the way to do it. But we have a Congress that seems incapable of doing the kind of compromising and planning and structuring that they are expected to do once they've been elected to office. And so I would tell the young officers to be up there. As young ensigns, your job is to take care of the sailors and Marines that are entrusted to your care. Let me and Mark and everybody in this room worry about what the country's going to look like, what foreign policy is going to look like. You start off your careers by taking care of those young Americans entrusted to your care. That's how I started out as a young second lieutenant 56 or 7 years ago. And my mission was, you take those 40 soldiers, you're in Germany, you're at the Fulda Gap. Guard between these 2 trees, Lieutenant Powell. And when the Russian army comes, you stop it. Hey man, no problem. I'm from New York. This ain't no big deal, you know? But that was it. And a very precise mission. And I lived and died for those 40 soldiers. You will do the same for the sailors and the Marines. And then 28 years later, I was a Corps commander, 70,000 soldiers at the same place, slightly wider section. Life was good. It was the same Russian army that was across the Iron Curtain for me, the 8th Guards Army of the group of Soviet forces in Germany. And I knew them. I knew the commander. I knew them all. I knew exactly what I had to do. I've been studying it for 28 years. And next thing I knew, it all went away. It all went away. And never forget the day Gorbachev looked at me across the table. And he was mad at me. I was Reagan's national security advisor, and he'd been arguing and shouting at me and whatnot. And I was, getting a little annoyed. And then he calmed down, and his face softened, and his eyes, blinked and sparkled a bit. And I said, what the heck? And he leaned forward, and he just said to me, Generale, you'll have to find a new enemy. And I immediately thought to myself, I don't want to. Yeah. We got a good deal going here, man. Just because you're having a bad year, why do I have to change? But the whole world changed for me in that moment. I went back to the Pentagon a year or so later and told my fellow generals and admirals, it's over, guys. It's over. Warsaw Pact's going to join NATO. What? Yep, and it happened. But what also happened was that pressure cooker top of containment that kept the world pretty stable, the red side of the map, the green side of the map, and we compete for the third world. When that came off, then all kinds of things came popping out that nobody expected. And technology expedited it all. We're in a wonderful world now where everybody can see what everybody else is doing, where cellular telephony has changed the world, where the internet has changed the world. Changed it for mostly the better, but there are some downsides to it as well. And you are the youngsters who are of the iPad generation. You know, you're going to teach us how to use all this stuff, and you're going to tell us what's next. I hang out in Silicon Valley a lot, and I see what's coming next. I see all the wearable things we're using and things on our wrists to show us how many steps we took. You know, I don't know why I care. But I'm watching all that. And so you guys will have to tell us how to use this technology, how to use it for good, and also keep it from infecting our society with things that are bad. And that's my charge to you. My favorite item of technology, which I think is the best ever made, is the Easy Pass. Thank you. Thank you.
How do you feel? Just as we're thinking about the word respect, is that what you teach us, General Powell? Is it humility with a little sense of humor? Is it about servant leadership? Now we'll read your formal plaque. But I think you've touched our lives of this nation as you've touched the world, as you've touched the kids that you've been associated to give you and Alma America's promise. Can we start there? So, General Powell, on behalf of the World Affairs Council of Washington, D.C., to the International Affairs Award is presented today to the Honorable Colin L. Powell in recognition for outstanding public service of the United States and distinguished global diplomatic leadership. On October 8th, 2014, Washington, D.C., so to a leading forum for education and learning. This is where learning happens, and no one exemplifies that more than General Colin Powell.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, dear. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for World Affairs Today, a production of the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C. Stay connected with us at www.worldaffairstoday.org.